We return to the Guild Wars 2 graveyard. Today I'll be talking you guys through a lot of missing assets, areas, experiences that once upon a time were playable or were going to be playable in the MMO, but are no longer. So Guild Wars 2 has been running for 8 years now, and that's been a lot of time for things to stack up. I've already done 2 videos, one on general gear and stuff we could kind of acquire, but unfortunately now no longer can, and another one on a whole feature about an iPhone, iPad, Android app that was going to assist people to play the game, and actually featured a lot of this area of the world here, Queensdale. So today I want to run through a bunch more stuff, starting off with a little response to the first part. Now, I was talking a bit about the mini snake and how cool it would be to have it running around with you. It was available in the betas. Some of you guys did clarify. There was also this in the betas, a mystic chest and a mystic key. So these are the predecessor items to the Black Lion chest and Black Lion key. Apparently the snakes could come out of this, and a lot of you guys who responded to the previous part who actually had experienced the snakes said you got them from that. So that's nice. I also had some comments that apparently snakes were just wandering around the world, and maybe the devs got rid of them because the animations could be so crazy. And well, if you saw part 1, yeah, I can totally get that. So, what's the first topic I want to deal with? Well, it's probably best demonstrated on a totally different character on my account, actually. And that would be my Mesmer. Let's talk about a story that I honestly don't have much of a stake in. I don't care about this, but a lot of the community does. Let's talk about human female idols. So every character in Guild Wars 2, if you stand around AFK long enough, they'll trigger an idol animation. Like this one here. Do you see I just looked to the side, I shifted on my feet a little bit, I've lifted my hand up. So, for many years, well, I say many years, for the first 2 years of this game being out, there was a human female idle animation in which we do a big yawn, a big stretch, we kind of puff out our chest, we arc our back a bit with our, fingers interlocked, and we kind of click them above our head, we give a good real stretch, and then we kind of stand back down. There are many videos of it around. I've never actually caught a video of it, so I'm not going to be splicing one in here. But then, around 2014, ArenaNet removed it. You'll see that we're doing another idol again, but it's the same one. So where the human female specifically had a bit of variety, now she'll only ever do that. And it was a bit of an enigma to people. It wasn't listed in a patch note that this had happened. Someone went over to the Guild Wars 2 forums, and here's the story. They asked, hey, there's a bug that's been introduced. My characters aren't doing this anymore. Bit of back and forth from the devs, until ultimately we had this message from Gale clarifying why the studio did it. She said, some time ago it was noticed and reported as a bug that during cinematics the fidget animations continued. So you're seeing this exciting story bit about a dragon attack, and behind the scenes your character is yawning and toeing the sand. It just didn't fit. So the animations were temporarily removed to be worked on and reincorporated in a way that allowed them to perform normally in the game, but to stop or maybe change during cinematics. But getting to a place where the animations could be configured on a more fine-grained basis took more time than anticipated. By the way, this post itself is like 2015, it's like half a decade old. She says, from what I understand, the team has the tools to reconfigure and re-enable the animations, but the team lead told me that naturally they'll need to figure out when or someone, or maybe more than one person, can be assigned the task. As it turns out, each animation bit needs to be reconfigured individually. Too long didn't read. This change is coming as soon as it can be scheduled and prioritized. Naturally, some matters are higher on the priority list, but this project will be scheduled as appropriate. So, here we are, half a decade later, and the animations are not in the game. This has actually kind of blown up into a massive thing for Guild Wars 2, to the degree where I think most people watching this video probably already have followed this drama, so to speak. I think there's a lot of people who are genuinely really impacted about not having these animations back. So many people care about how delicately crafted their little virtual Barbie doll is, and they want them to be able to stretch. Some people, like me, just feel like it's a bit of a shame to have had some good work done and now it's missing. You know, this whole series, I've got a real passion for these old things, not necessarily because the things themselves are great. I just feel like we don't have a complete product. And then I think there's a third type of person as well that just thinks it's farcical. It's been so long since the devs got round to implementing this. I can't really say that I'm in that third camp. let's be real, it's not a big thing for the game. I don't think the, like, hundreds of forum and Reddit posts over the years are at all justified, but it is pretty funny to think that ArenaNet don't care either. That's why it hasn't been prioritized. That's why no one's thought to really put in, because it doesn't matter. There is the issue of the original reason it was removed, because our character would look bored in a cutscene. Now that is a bit silly. I find it kind of hard to justify that. The truth is that a lot of the different race and gender combos have idle animations that make them look bored. Like the Sylvari get weirdly curious every now and then, kind of poke their nose around. The Asura have a fairly bored looking idle animation. They still play, but it's the human female one specifically that was removed. And I think that asynchronicity, if that's the right term there, is maybe what gets some people's backs up, particularly considering how many human females there are that played the game. Another interesting side to this is over the years, a fourth type of person has emerged. And I have to say this is quite weird, who seem to think that the real reason ArenaNet removed this was not because of them looking bored. As I just mentioned, several of the animations of the game look bored and they didn't pick those, but because the studio felt that the idols were sexist. There's this weird, like, overly antagonistic, like, element of this game's community that freak the hell out whenever they think that there's been a supposedly SJW change come in with the game. One example, and this was not something I was really going to talk about in my series, but one of the human female chest pieces from the early days, I think it was the Ara chest piece, had one boob was completely covered in like ironclad armor, and the other boob had like an undead hand grasping it. So it looked kind of stupid, honestly. You had like one boob out with a hand on it, and the other one was, you know, just more actually protected. And there was a patch that changed that armor so that both your boobs were covered. This kind of stuff aggravates people, and so there's been this weird whole line to the drama where there are people convinced ArenaNet thought it was offensive that we were like sticking our chest out or something. I do want to point out that one of the devs went on the record, and this guy's still at the studio, saying, lol, that's rich. No, they most definitely weren't removed for being sexist. They were removed because every time we went into a review of a serious story content, and you're supposed to be having really weighty conversations about Tyria-shaking monumental decisions you and your team were making, oops, is this boring? Why am I yawning and kicking the ground like I'd rather be anywhere else? It happens so often the only real way to address that feedback was to pull them out, because unfortunately our tools don't provide us designers with a way to throttle back only specific animations. So no, I do not believe that there's some great sexism conspiracy theory going on here. I don't even really think it's that important, but it is an element of the Guild Wars 2 graveyard. I've come here to Applenook, with the beautiful shadows in the ground, for one specific reason, to point out sometimes there are weird NPCs in the game. Was this the Sylvari? I think she might be standing at another hut, which are kind of untouched NPCs that haven't been updated at all since the early convention demos and the earliest alphas and betas. Now, why that's interesting is when ArenaNet put some of these updates in, they never changed the animations for these. So sometimes you'll find like a female Sylvari that is using human idol animations. And sometimes you'll find just weird types of human females that are also using weird old animations. There's even some Char that run differently. And in those situations, even to this day in 2020, if you're careful and you wait long enough, you might just catch the animation in play. So it is out there, but not on the players, and I think it's the players that want it the most. So for this next section, I wanted to talk about enemies. There's a lot of obscure, weird enemies in Guild Wars 2. Stuff like the Earth Stalker that only appears in World vs. World, or the Fire Stalker that's not really that populated anywhere. We talked about those in the first part. There's especially obscure enemies that only appear in like one personal story instance. My favorite example of that being a weird Risen Drake creature here. But they are technically still in-game, so maybe just about escaping the grave. I do have 4 examples of interesting enemies that, as far as I know, were never properly implemented. One of them started here. So this tower does appear in one of the demos for Sparkfly Fen. And on top of the tower, back then, there was permanently a Lich. The Lich was named Champion Nasir Al-Tanin, which I think if you translate it basically called him like a vizier or the dragon's champion, something like that. Really sounded like a big, important minion of Zaitan. Once the game actually came out, though, he's disappeared. You will not find him on the tower anymore. I'm amazed that there's another player there, apparently. You won't find him up here. The Tower of Modius and whatever story was going on with this wasn't implemented. There is a dynamic event, an escort, that starts here at Orvar's Glen where you come down. You do fight a boss here, but the actual specific named Lich is no longer there. He's kind of replaced by a more generic kind of character. Another unimplemented enemy seems to have some association maybe with Fireheart Rise. See, back when the game first came out, the devs were playing with having plants being enemies. And particularly if you ran a Ra explorable, and particularly the final path, Path 4, you'll know that one of the Melandra encounter there has her summoning like trees on the group, and you can DPS trees and they count as plants for Plant Slayer. It's all very weird. Well, out here as well in Fireheart Rise, you can find these. These are the prickleberry plants. These only exist here. They are enemies in game, and as you break them, you will see they have animations where they attack us, apply conditions, and when you break them, they kind of explode. This is not the same as like gathering from trees where you axe them down, right? This is actually another type of thing altogether that they've added animations to. There was another type of destructible enemy tree called the Vicious Plant, only appeared super early, and now is no longer in the game. I know, it's not the most exciting of them, but in terms of cataloging everything, I thought it was worth pointing out. More stuff from the demos too. We, of course, have this ring of merchants here. When we very first got a glimpse at Guild Wars 2, these merchants were very closely tied to the state of all the dynamic events in the early areas of Queensdale. And so if the waters over there are poisoned, for example, then someone who would sell you energy potions over here no longer would, because he can get the water to craft the potions. If the events over near the Drakes weren't going well, you can buy fish as consumables, and so on. Well, when the game actually came out, it looks like the devs had culled away on this feature. You see her, Baker Claudette. There was someone else called Farmer Claudia who would stand, I think it was here, or maybe it was actually over at this stand, which also has goods outlined here, would sell basic early game vegetables, nothing too groundbreaking. Maybe if the RPG had gone in a different direction would have been really good, but she had been completely removed. The only other kind of NPC enemy style thing that I can think of that would be in the graveyard, probably, and you guys could correct me if I'm wrong about this in the comments, is a monster that appeared in one of the trailers. So back before the game came out, at the end of many trailers, they showed, after, you know, the credits screen, a little flash, a little glimpse of something really dangerous and badass. Maybe that was the Iron Forgeman, maybe that was the Shatterer, maybe that was Geheran Balefire, or whatever. Well, in the end of the Manifesto trailer, you can actually see this. A Sylvari underwater, as an enormous underwater creature swims out in front of her. Now, this beast is massive, and unless that was a feature in Living World Season 4 or recently, I'm pretty sure this never actually came into the game. Always a bit of a sting to see stuff like that, because frankly, that was stuff that was advertising the game itself, and the devs never really got around to. In fact, I could do a whole video dedicated to the alpha and do beta convention stuff like the archery shootout. Maybe that'll be a thing for another video. Moving on from enemies, let's talk about areas that are unexplored. Now, this is something that I've actually covered a good amount of over the years on YouTube, but I'm still thoroughly excited about. First of all, here at the end of the Heart of Thorns expansion in the Dragon Stand map. Dragon Stand features 3 assaults to 3 blighting towers, which all must fall before you actually get to deal with the final boss. It's a brilliant map, but what you might not know is that there was actually a 4th path planned for this area, and even achievement progress was implemented. And it's this little area down here that you can clearly see from the map art is a bit different. This path included 2 regions, so you can see how we've got the Bitter Harvest here, and then you've got like the Chuck Nest. There's 2 areas, or the Charnel Barbed Gate and the Wyvern Scar. Well, again, there were going to be 2 areas down here. This was the Deserted Coast and the Thorn Hollow, somewhere around here. I'm not sure where the actual connection would be, maybe south of the Chuck Nest, but the idea that the Zerg would start in 3 groups and then end up splitting into 4 is pretty cool. There are some hints as to what this content might have been like, and it relates to the Nightmare Court, who, as we know, probably should have had a much bigger influence on this expansion than they did in the end. The devs were crunched, never got a lot of stuff in. But if you watch very closely when you actually are in the final phase at the Dragon's Domain, all the little islands have NPCs you recognize from the expansion, except one island. One island has a Sylvari Duchess. Of course, at this point in the story, there's no Foul Lane around, and this Duchess seems to be the new leader of the Nightmare Court, and it was probably her assisting in this path for the original development, but it all got cut. The NPC's still there, she still has an island, but as to why she would be allied with us, what the Nightmare Court's situation is like post Heart of Thorns and all those topics, the devs have never broached. So this one's always been very, very fascinating to me. Another thing related to the Sylvari also is here at the Caledon Forest. Now, I've got a video on this, so I'm not going to do a full recreation. You guys can search on my channel if you'd like. In fact, each of these topics, I think I already have videos. There was a full jumping puzzle in the Caledon Forest removed. Caledon Forest is already kind of notable for having a lot of jumping puzzles. There's one down here in a small hole. There's actually 2 back-to-back here. There's a lab jumping puzzle here, which is, you know, for a game that was usually doing 1 jumping puzzle per map, this is already at a very high rate. Little do most people realize, but if you break out of the map around here at the Hemlock Coil, we can go to the waypoint and have a look. There used to be a little bit of a platform you can do. I think an update in more recent years has probably tweaked this, but then mounts did come in. If you climb out at the Hemlock Coil, you could swim under the map and actually find yourself near another jumping puzzle, which seemed to have a weird X-Men almost thing with Cerebro and a giant dome. Yeah, it looks like there's probably invisible walls everywhere here now. So another unfinished JP. It's down there behind those vines. Again, I have videos. You can see some of the assets just down there of sneaking in and seeing what I can down there, but never implemented. I guess whoever made Caledon Forest really fell in love with the idea of jumping puzzles in the jungle, and so we ended up getting a ton of them. Next, for areas removed, includes a place in the Path of Fire campaign. Now, this one's a little bit more obscure, but during Path of Fire, of course, we go to the Tomb of the Primeval Kings, and it involves a visit to the Mists and the Realm of Torment, now Cormier's Library. Well, there was going to be another moment, and the devs talked very candidly about this in some developer interviews after the expansion came out, where we'd actually go to the Hall of Heroes itself. It was a very real idea that got actually mapped out and implemented as a playable space, but then the devs didn't really know what to do with it that would really be justifying it in the story, and they decided to hold it off for later. That's actually a decision that I stand by, and I think that they made the right call there. I'd like to see the Hall of Heroes be done in a really dedicated, careful way instead of just kind of jumped in. But funnily enough, if you actually mine the client and look at the details, you can find that somewhere around here, I think it is, near where you actually explore Kesho underground, is a copy of the Hall of Heroes. You just can't get in there and explore it. Check out that Shaman's blog if you want more details on this one. Looking over at Ore now, and the final dungeon in which we take on the Elder Dragon Zaitan is one of my favorite missing maps and interesting stories. So when the release trailer came out, the weird live action one that wasn't too good until the last moments where it went in game, you got to see this. A bunch of heroes taking on the Elder Dragon of Death on some kind of a beach. Now, that is not the Straits of Devastation, and that is not anything that appears here in Ara story mode. That is not in-game, even though they made it. Just like that area outside of Ratasum that I mentioned in the first part of this video series. So where is it? Well, there's another weird thing in the early trailers. You could see a massive dragon corpse. Mining revealed a few years ago that the devs had actually made a whole other enormous Ara map. Possibly it was here, or maybe it was never mapped anywhere properly. Early on, shortly after making Queensdale and Blaze Ridge, in which they wanted to see what like linear endgame stuff would be, and that is what featured the beach sequence, as well as a run through the mountain range, and possibly going inside the dragon himself after he was shot out of the sky. Just a huge feature that was completely wiped out, and I haven't talked about for many years, so I do encourage you guys to check that video out. Just type Wooden Potato Zaitan's corpse or something in YouTube. It will come up. Similarly, and lastly as well, was a world versus world concept called the Fortune's Veil. It was going to be an entirely new world versus world map / game type, where you would, instead of having a big open world map like this, you'd have a map that was kind of linear in your progression along it. You'd run through a deserty area, you'd go into an icy mountain area, you'd go into a jungly area, maybe a chalkish area. You'd weave your way along, and how it worked was one server would be defending the pass and would have all these choke points and areas to set up siege and fight back, while two other servers, while still being each other's enemies, would progress up, and you'd kind of, interact a little as you go. But the idea is whoever can get to the end can claim the pass, and then they own it. This was actually a huge feature that they did loads of voice acting for. They'd clearly been playtesting a lot, and then never made it into the game. If you are compelled at all in this series, thinking about all the work they put into something and then it never comes through, look at my coverage of the Fortune's Veil. Look at the work ArenaNet did on that one before deciding it probably wasn't a good idea to split the world versus world player base up into this kind of new format. It was kind of like where world versus world meets raiding to an extent. Very, very cool. I'm not saying that the devs made the wrong decision, by the way. I actually have a lot of respect for any studio that can cut something so far along in development. That one was really nuts, especially the amount of voice acting and work that had clearly gone into it. Really crazy to me. The last thing I can think of for unseen areas that were potentially cuts actually comes from a more obscure place, and that's the novels. The actual written paperback novels, if you open them on the first page, you're presented with a map of Tyria. Now, this map of Tyria was originally drawn before the game came out, and you'll see it has various landmarks written on it. In particular, you'll see that the squares are dungeons, and, well, what's this? There's 2 extra dungeons on the map? Yes, it looks like they were going to do a dungeon for Bloodstone Fen in the early days that never made it into the game, and they were going to do a dungeon at the ruins of Den Ravi. Now, it is true that you can explore the Henge of Den Ravi in Guild Wars 2, but it's not a dungeon, and you can now explore Bloodstone Fen. There's even an entrance to a raid here, but it teleports you really far away. So maybe these shouldn't be considered in the graveyard? But the idea of having a proper, regular dungeon like Twilight Arbor with a story and explorable mode in these locations at launch, now that's really interesting to me. And that might also explain why the fort had a portal behind it way back at release as well. That never made it, and for me, that means they're in the graveyard. One final section, I want to talk about titles that got removed, or achievements at least. So yes, when we're in game, we do of course have a historical section. These are things added, say, in Season 1, but we never got. Like, I never got Kyo Advanced Supporter back in 2013, so that's gone for me. I do not count that as a part of the graveyard, though. Certain players were able to get in and were able to get this. These were, that was in the design, and I'm not counting all of this legacy stuff. Beyond that, though, there were some weirder things. First of all, the Fortune Hunter title and a trader achievement. So these would have appeared in the community section, probably, and looks like they're encouraging direct player trading. As we know, Guild Wars 2 released without direct player trading. They do it all through the TP, so the TP can tax everyone and can be a gold sink for everyone, and they can control it a bit better. But it looks like maybe at one point there was going to be direct trading, and it was going to be from collecting and swapping stuff with other people. Obviously, more recent games, even like I played Borderlands 3 a few months ago, has this kind of feature. Well, it was going to be here in Guild Wars 2. I can't say I think it would have been the most prestigious of achievements, because frankly, you could just game that with someone else. But it is interesting that they called it Fortune Hunter, which was kind of one of the title tracks from the original game, opening locked chests, which of course, an equivalent doesn't really exist in the sequel. Next is this curious one, the Useful Skills title and the Adventure achievement. So this is for unlocking skills, but as you know in Guild Wars 2, as we got it at launch, there wasn't too much call for this. The idea was that players would get all their skills quite quickly, and particularly after the new player experience, that happens even faster now. The skill wheels are cool, but this is all much later. No, why this achievement was probably implemented was because back with the original design of the game, there were going to be tiers of skills. So, for example, you would buy Flame Strike, and it would have a certain effect on it. But later, when you got to a higher level, you could buy Flame Strike again, except it would be stronger now. Maybe it would have another effect on it. Maybe it would be scaling and damage or something. lower cooldown. I don't know the full design of this because we barely had any chance to see it. After the earliest convention demos, this whole system got canned. And so now that it wasn't a game of getting all skills and their tiers, I guess the achievement was less necessary. There's no official statement about this, but that's my guess on this one. And finally, we have this one, the Hero of the People achievement. Now, this is actually not that old. This was going to become available when collections were added. Arena added a lot of basic collections. This was set to be one of them, but a few were broken on the original slew. There was a dev post on the forums about this. Fractal weapons, for example, were bugged initially. Most got implemented. In fact, they all did, except this, the Hero of the People. This one was related to getting champ boxes, which as containers are maybe a little bit complicated, and I think actually some of these containers are no longer available in the game. So for whatever reason, the devs just decided not to go for it. Frankly, even if this had been implemented, champ bags are not that tricky to get a hold of, so maybe it's not a big loss for the game. So there you have it, guys. That's a variety of other topics. Now, I do have a list of skills that were going to come to the game and never were implemented in the end. Some crazy crafting item stuff. I've got loads of ideas. There's a whole world of masteries too. They will be in the next part. I talk about them now, but we're already half an hour. So before I alienate all the people who can't handle a longer than half an hour video, I'll call it for there. So thank you, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments, and especially about any mistakes. I have a feeling that water creature in the trailer was implemented in the end. Am I wrong about that? I'm pretty sure he's not in the game, right? Let me know. Thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoy. Please feel free to check out my Twitter or join us on Discord if you want more conversation, more little ways to interact with me. It would mean the world to me. It's down in the description. I'm trying to remember to actually plug those places at the end of the videos at the moment. So, thanks for that, and I will see you all on the next one. Take it easy.